we've never questioned this team's ceiling. We have never sat here and said Kansas can't play with the very best teams in the country when they're playing their A game. And, you know, whether that was when Iowa State came down Fieldhouse, whether that was beating Duke, whether that was the UCF game, whether that was the first 39 and a half minutes against Houston. You know, I think you look at all of those different things. Kansas is capable of beating anybody in the country. The question isn't that. The question is, can you string 4, 5, 6 wins together? And that's where the question mark lies. And to your point, that's where this is the foundation. But that's why you have to watch this Colorado game sort of with bated breath, if you will, because you're looking to see, was this a one-off?
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
Paid all who enter. Beware this podcast. That's right. This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. As always, we're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. Emprise Bank has been supporting local businesses in the Kansas City area for years, and they helped out Greg Goodwin and Alan Tipton, who were taking over the Learning Tree, a 25-year-old toy store in the Kansas City area, and it was more about business. It was more than just business for Emprise Bank, helping them out with an SBA loan. It was by keeping the magic alive for Kansas City area families. Emprise Bank helped them make the seamless transition, guiding them through the process with the SBA loan so they could focus on building the community and inspiring young minds. Emprise Bank is your partner in all things possible. You can visit emprisebank.com/SBA to learn more. Emprise Bank, member FDIC. If you are watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. You can drop a comment. We had lots of great comments on our recent shows as well, so thank you to everybody that interacts with us there. If you're listening on audio, you can always subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, and leave us a 5-star rating and review. Share a thought there. You can also find us on social media at KFlaherty KCSN, at NickSpringer29, at PayHeed KCSN for our podcast account. Interact with us there as well. So, much better result for Kansas basketball. We're going to be talking about that on today's show. KU against Oklahoma State on Fieldhouse gets the bounce back they needed desperately as they eviscerate the Cowboys. We'll talk about what that means and where KU goes from here. But first, I felt like we probably needed to address this. There was a story that came out ahead of the Oklahoma State game regarding Bill Self and what seemed to be possible interest between him and Oklahoma State for their, at the time, vacant head coaching job last year. Bill Self addressed it actually at a press conference ahead of the game and basically said, yeah, I talked to him every time they've had a head coaching opening, and sort of poo-pooed it in one way. Didn't really, I guess, deny it's not the right term, but sort of like half agreed with what the article said, but then also pushed back on other parts of it. So I don't know. All in all, my takeaway is he didn't take the job. He's still at KU, obviously. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. Just real quick before we dive into the game, Kevin, what was kind of your reaction, I guess, to that whole situation popping up within 24 hours of the game, and then just kind of how it went?
Well, I think that last part was my main thought, right? Like the timing was certainly fascinating. I mean,
yeah, you think so?
Oklahoma State hired its coach. I think April 1st was when he was announced, and so the Self interview obviously would have had to have been, week or two before that. It's just coming out now. They're right before Kansas is going to play Oklahoma State. And so that was the thing to me. I mean, not like you said, I mean, there might have been some kernels of truth in there. It certainly read very pro Oklahoma State in there in a lot of ways. And the timing was certainly interesting of hey, let's get this thing out right before the game. And so Self didn't come right out and say, no, it didn't happen, but basically said this part didn't happen, this part didn't happen, this part was different than they said. Whatever it was, if it was designed to be a distraction, if it was designed to to sow further discord in a program that probably had quite a bit of discord coming off of the Utah trip. It did not work today, Nick.
Yeah, that's true. Kansas absolutely steamrolled Oklahoma State. And maybe it was a positive for KU. Maybe we need Colorado to publish a story coming up about how Coach Prime was recruiting Bill Self to be the duo of football and basketball there. And then we need Texas Tech to put out a story of, maybe we just needed every single opponent. But yeah, you highlighted a couple of my other takeaways was the timing of it, obviously, seems very pertinent. And just to go back to the curtain a little bit on the journalistic aspect of this is, as journalists, you will sometimes become privy to information that you hear the term embargoed information, which basically means a source, somebody may tell you something and say, hey, you are not allowed to go public with this until X day or X time. That's kind of what this feels like to me. Somebody at Oklahoma State, when it went to the Tulsa World and said, by the way, Bill Self was in town or whatever, whatever the reporting was, but don't say anything about it until right before they play Oklahoma, right before they play KU or something. Who knows how it may have played out, but that's certainly the timing was fascinating. But obviously, it backfired on the court for Oklahoma State as KU absolutely dominated them. So, and again, I want to reiterate from my perspective, Self didn't he stayed at KU, right? It didn't even seem like anything was really offered there. So, just kind of a nothing burger, I think, at the end of the day. And as a result, Kansas against Oklahoma State, and they absolutely dominate. A huge win for KU over Oklahoma State, 96-64. They lose by 34 against BYU earlier in the week. They nearly win by 34. They were up by as much as, 37 or 38 in the game against Oklahoma State. They end up winning by 32, 96-64. A very impressive game. Early on, Oklahoma State was hanging around. And then, Kevin, in the first half, that game really turned with about 10 minutes left in the first half. Kansas was up 4, I think, 21-17. And from there, they just absolutely annihilated Oklahoma State and really put them to bed by halftime.
Yeah, it was interesting because they did one of those in-game interviews, right, with Bill Self. And KU had 4 turnovers, I think, in the first 4 minutes. Altogether, KU and Oklahoma State had 7 turnovers in the first 4 minutes, and they went to Bill Self. And I thought one of the interesting things was he didn't question the team's energy, right? He said that, which has been an issue with this team. He said, I think we're playing hard. We're not necessarily playing well just yet. And that was a key distinction there, in that once the shots started falling, once, Kansas stopped turning the ball over as much, is when Kansas ran away and hit. And certainly a guy I'm sure we're going to talk about, Diggy Coit, had a huge hand in that, in terms of it was a close game. You didn't necessarily feel bad about where KU was at, but they hadn't really pulled away. Diggy Coit makes his first 3 3-point attempts, and KU's kind of off to the races at that point.
Yeah, Diggy Coit, remember, he started conference play, I think, like 1 of 20 from 3 or something like that. And you probably had a lot of people really questioning why Kansas brought him in. He's a severely undersized guard, which causes some matchup problems at times, depending on the opponent you're playing. And, we've seen him bring the energy, but to see him really now come alive from the perimeter really kind of shows, I think, what KU saw in him to bring him in the first place, and shows his value, right? I mean, that is a very, very great tool to have if you have somebody off the bench like that can come in and knock down some shots for you, which was really great to see. And he really, really demonstrated value. I think he had back-to-back threes in the first half as part of to kickstart what ended up being like a 30-6 run for KU to end the half. So he was phenomenal in the game, and I think you really saw his impact. And that seemed to sort of spread around to everybody else. I mean,
yeah,
Heath Mayo was hitting threes. Rylan Griffin ended up hitting a couple threes as well. So those 3 guys, when they're shooting the ball well, you can see what it can mean for Kansas. And as a result, KU makes their most threes of the season with 14. They surpassed their previous season high with like 12 minutes left in the game. So it was a very impressive afternoon shooting the ball from 3 for KU. And you can see, again, we've been talking about the peaks and valleys of this team. That was their example of the peak, right? If those 3 guys are shooting the ball the way they are, and you can bring in Diggy Coit off the bench to be that extra spark, it's very much extremely positive results for KU. But on top of that, one thing that really jumped to me in the first half, Kevin, was they got back to playing team offense.
Yeah.
The ball was moving very well in the first half. Some excellent passing, some great possessions where all five guys touched the ball. It led to what felt like half a dozen dunks for KJ Adams. And then you had the crazy play where Hunter Dickinson strips and goes from 45 feet in for a dunk. That was crazy. You never seen Hunter Dickinson do that before. So I was really impressed with that. And Oklahoma State just didn't have a response. I mean, it became pretty clear that if Bryce Thompson wasn't going to put the team on his back, that I don't think Oklahoma State really had enough firepower to hang around. And that proved to be what the case was, as Kansas just kind of rolled the rest of the first half.
Yeah, DeJuan Harris wound up making a couple threes as well. And DeJuan's first half was terrific. I mean, he had 9 points. I think he had 4 assists at halftime as well. Had a block shot, had 6 steals in a half. And it was the old DeJuan Harris defensively, right? Using his length and his quickness to kind of jump into those lanes and really be disruptive. And for a while there, Oklahoma State was just getting nothing offensively, because every time they tried to pass the ball, it felt like there was a Kansas hand, right there to do it. But there was the possession that ended, I think, in a Hunter Dickinson layup where, there were 4 or 5 passes in a row just whipping around the perimeter, where you had, it was like, okay, this guy's got a good shot. He passed it up for a great shot, passed it up for an even better shot, and it's Hunter for a layup or whatever. And just the way the ball was humming, I'm glad you made that point, because that's something that I think you're going to look at this game and there are going to be people who kind of poo-poo the result because they say, it's Oklahoma State. Look, only 2 teams this year have beaten Oklahoma State by 30 or more points, Kansas and Texas Tech. And so I think it's one thing to beat Oklahoma State. Obviously, Oklahoma State has struggled this year. It's another thing to really put it on Oklahoma State the way that Kansas did. And if you're looking for something that can carry over from that game, I think it's the ball movement that you were talking about, the way that they were sharing the ball, the way the ball was moving and setting up open looks for different guys. You can't necessarily count on Kansas to shoot 14 for 30 from 3, game in and game out. One thing this Kansas team can be is an excellent passing team, because you have so many guys that can move the ball, that can pass the ball, that can get the ball into troublesome spots for the defense and then move it based off of the defense's reactions. And so I think when you looked at this Kansas team heading into the season and felt like, what would it take for them to be number one? One of the things that you looked at was that passing ability and the way that they were going to be able to move the ball. And that's something that I hope they're able to take it and sort of transition forward from this game.
Yeah, and you think about how things went for KU. That's kind of the big question I want to dive into a little bit deeper here later on in the show is really what this means going forward. But to kind of bookend what you mentioned there about Oklahoma State, they just beat UCF and scored over 100 points. Like they were coming off of a really good game. They had every reason to come into this game against KU, expecting to play well, considering what KU had been looking like the past week. And so, I think you're right. And people may try to sort of erase this good performance from KU and say, it doesn't mean anything. And it may not mean anything if Kansas can't string together a couple better games coming up here down the stretch that we'll get into as well. So it's something to consider. And I do want to dive deeper into that. But let's take a quick break first. That will give us a chance to tell you about Home Field Apparel. You can shop Home Field Apparel at homefieldapparel.com. You can use the promo code PAID24 for 15% off your first order. Get yourself some great Kansas gear as we gear up for the NCAA tournaments. You can also find 130 other schools as well. So if you got a family member, friend, relative, whatever it may be, who is a fan of another school, you can get them something that they can put on for their team, possibly heading into the NCAA tournament, unless they're not making the NCAA tournament, like a certain team to the west of us. But that's neither here nor there. But anyways, point being, you can get something for any school, really. Over 130 other schools at homefieldapparel.com. And more KU basketball talk is coming up next.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your number one source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer here with Kevin Flaherty. No matter where you are listening, watching, be sure to subscribe. You can leave a 5-star rating and review on audio. You can drop a comment on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks, KCSN. Share your thoughts about this game and about what it means for KU going forward. One other quick thing I did want to mention before we kind of go big picture on this thing is we got to talk about Floyd Badinger. Coming off the bench, that guy was a madman in the second half. He finishes the game with 16 rebounds in 21 minutes. A really, really great performance for him. And I think this is, Kevin, probably, I mean, obviously this is ideal in a lot of scenarios where you win a game by 30, but I think when you look at sort of the minute distribution, like Hunter Dickinson ends up playing only 21 minutes. In a more competitive game, obviously you figure he'll play more than that, but Flory gives you 21 minutes off the bench with 16 rebounds and 6 points. That's about as good as it gets from him. He was fantastic.
Yeah, add in the 3 blocks, and I don't think the 3 blocks included the called goaltend, which was absolutely not at the end. So I mean the rim protection stuff was great too, and I'm glad you made those points because some people are going to look at the 6 points and say, well, he didn't score super well, he missed some looks around the rim. Look, if Flory's rebounding and he's protecting the rim, that's what you need from him right now. He doesn't need to come in and score 10 points. He doesn't need to score 15 points. If he can do that other stuff, he's going to have tremendous value for you. And just playing with the energy level that he did, where he's getting on the floor for balls. He tipped out a loose ball or two as well in sort of scramble situations. I thought he was really good. Obviously, KJ had like the 3 first half dunks that kind of served to galvanize and energize the team as well. And to your point, it was really nice for them to be able to play so many guys, not really have to play anybody a whole lot of minutes, and all of that was really big. And this is an Oklahoma State team that, whatever you think about them, KenPom favored KU to win this game by 17. I bring up KenPom versus the betting line because the betting line factors in how you're playing right now, and KU's not playing very well heading into this game. KenPom, it's just based on what you've done all season long, right? And so because of that, basically the team that beat Duke is factored in, equally with the fact that KU got absolutely run at BYU, lost to Utah, etc. And so taking the team that KU's been all year long, saying you're supposed to win by 17, and then you go out and win by 32, it was a really, really strong performance all around. And especially, Nick, overcoming those nervy first few minutes. And I think, Kansas closed the first half pretty well. Henry over at the Lawrence Shore World tweeted out that in the first 4 minutes of the second half, KU was +2, which pretty much any time now that KU makes it out of those 4-minute increments without, losing a significant amount of ground, it feels like a victory. And Kansas actually gained ground in the second half. And so when you look at all of those things, really a strong all-around performance and exactly what you wanted to see in this. If this was the game that KU won, but won in a close game or a game that was, kind of uncomfortable for a lot of it or whatever else, I think the alarm bells would still be ringing. But the whole thing about, hey, we're looking at this as a whole new season, take everything else, throw it away. If this was the only Kansas basketball that you had seen all season, you would have sky-high hopes for this team.
Yeah, it was a great start to the season, Kevin. Fantastic start. I mean, I don't think you could ask any for a better start. 1-0, you win by 32. Great job, guys. Hell yeah. Hell of a start to the season. Awesome job. I think your sentiment rings true. And that was kind of what I wanted to dig into a little bit deeper here is going into this game, in my head, I was thinking, okay, what you mentioned about what if Kansas only wins by 6 and it's kind of a really tight game versus something like this? Am I going to feel that much different? Or how do I view, just trying to think about all that. And where I've kind of settled is
to see them perform this way definitely matters. It should not be erased that they won this game by 32 versus winning it by 10. Like that should factor in. But the point remains that this needs to be a stepping stone into improved performances over these next 4 games now that you have remaining in the season. And that's kind of how I view it is, okay, you took care of business. You more than took care of business. You absolutely annihilated Oklahoma State at home. Great. Now, if you can take that and stack it onto a strong performance on the road against Colorado and prove that you can do it on the road against maybe a lesser opponent, then you come back home to play a top 15 team in Texas Tech at home, another stepping stone. Then you go on the road against an elite opponent in Houston. So it's sort of, I'm kind of viewing it as like building blocks at this point for these next 4 games, really 3 games now for KE before you play Arizona at home to end the season. And this was obviously a great start. I mean, I don't think you could ask for sort of a better foundation to lay for these next 4 games to end the season. But yes, that question does remain. How much does a result like this really make you feel in terms of is Kansas, back or have they flipped the switch? I don't think you can say that based on how the season has gone with the inconsistency that KU has had. I don't think you can say that right now. But again, if they go out and put together a solid 40 minutes against Colorado, and then they take care of business against Texas Tech, then I think maybe you can start to have that conversation. Because look, we've seen KU do this. I mean, they went and beat UC on the road by they've done this earlier in the season at times, and it hasn't resulted in consistent play after that. So that becomes the big key is, okay, can you build off of this and go further and not just let this be sort of a one-off? Because I think we've seen plenty of one-offs from this team over the course of the season, both really good and really bad. But you know what gets you knocked out of the NCAA tournament? Is one-off performances. And if it's a bad game, right? I mean, if you play like you did against BYU, you're losing any game in the NCAA tournament. But obviously, if you play like you did against Oklahoma State, then you're going to be cutting the nets down. So the key is just sort of, I guess, finding that consistency, which is obviously what we've been kind of highlighting throughout the course of this past couple of weeks, especially is finding that, and if they can. And so again, fantastic foundation, but yes, the question becomes, what does it mean? And I think right now it just means you've done the ground, you've laid the groundwork, you've laid a great building block to start with for these next 4 games, but it doesn't mean anything if you don't start putting up walls and building a house. If you just lay the foundation and just leave it, then you've got nothing. So there's got to be more to it than that, obviously.
Breach. Yeah, no, that's exactly where I'm at, in that you can't build everything without having a strong performance first, right? Like, you can't have 2 great games without having 1. You can't have 3 great games without having 1. And so, as important as this was, especially coming off of that last trip, and, you always talk about with shooters missing a lot of shots, like, oh, they just need to see a couple go through the basket, and they'll look fine. You could almost see their confidence growing in real time, right? They were the shooters who saw the ball go through the basket a few times and like, oh yeah, I can play this game. This does work. The confidence level was off the charts compared to what it looked like against BYU. But to your point, Kansas has been a really good, really confident team, particularly at home, earlier this year. And I think that when you look at it, we've never questioned this team's ceiling. We have never sat here and said Kansas can't play with the very best teams in the country when they're playing their A game. And, whether that was when Iowa State came down Fieldhouse, whether that was beating Duke, whether that was the UCF game, whether that was the first 39 and a half minutes against Houston. I think you look at all of those different things, Kansas is capable of beating anybody in the country. The question isn't that. The question is, can you string 4, 5, 6 wins together? And that's where the question mark lies. And to your point, that's where this is the foundation. But that's why you have to watch this Colorado game sort of with bated breath, if you will, because you're looking to see, was this a one-off? Was this a, hey, you returned home, you got a little bit of rest, and everybody came out looking refreshed and put it on a bad team? Or is it the sort of thing where it's like, okay, you've got 2 in a row now, and then you're going to, have most of the week off before hosting Texas Tech at Allen Fieldhouse in a big game, and you have a chance to get 3 at that point. And so you can't do any of that without one. And so that first one is super important. But to your point, we have seen this team get up for single games. What we haven't seen them do for the most part, there was a stretch in there, when Shaq was starting and playing 20 minutes, each game. I think he did that for like a 6-game stretch, and they went 5-1 over that stretch, with the one loss being at Iowa State in a game that was pretty close, and then Iowa State kind of stretched it out late. We haven't seen that in a while, and so if this is going to be a KU team that's going to make any noise in March, you really need to see the okay, but now what part of that sentence.
Yeah, and you mentioned Shaq Moore, and you may be wondering, why didn't he play? Bill Self basically said that foot injury continues to linger for him, and it's been an issue for him still. So it seems like his availability is probably literally going to be day to day, week to week. Obviously, in a game like this, he didn't play at all, and this would be a game where you'd expect him to at least get out a little bit considering the score. So obvious that he's still dealing with that, and that kind of leads me to tack on to what you were mentioning about everything here. Is Bill Self was asked specifically about this topic on Friday ahead of the game against Oklahoma State about why do you think that this team can turn it on? Like what gives you confidence that you think they can do it? And Self really said 2 points. He said, one, they're a healthy team, right? I mean, besides Chinook Moore, this is a healthy team. DeJuan Harris is healthy. Hunter Dickinson is healthy. KJ Adams has gotten healthy. Zeke Mayo, right? Like they're a healthy team, which is honestly something that not a ton of teams can say, obviously, at this time of the year. And he kind of pointed to, last season, that was one of the reasons why he felt that it was going to be a struggle for that KU team last year, is because no Kevin McCullough. Hunter Dickinson was obviously dealing with something through a majority of the season. They were not a fully healthy team, but this year's team is. That was his first point. The second point is basically exactly what you just said, which is Bill Self said, I've seen them do it. Like I've seen them be a team that can do that, earlier in the season, right? It's one thing to, I guess, for lack of a better term, just sort of blindly believe that you can do it or turn it on, versus we have seen this team turn it on. And that was kind of what Bill Self said. He's like, hey, we've seen them. I've seen them do it. That's what gives me faith that they can do it, is that I've seen them do it in specific games. Now the question again just becomes, okay, can you stack that into a 3 or 4 game stretch, or in the case of the NCAA tournament, a 4, 5, 6 game stretch, which is what you would need to do if you want to make it all the way to San Antonio and a possible Final Four or national championship, which I don't think is entirely off the table at this point, if KU can get the right matchups and sort of go that route. But again, it just comes down to, you've got another game coming up against Colorado on Monday, which, by the way, you look at KU's schedule. So they just played today, Saturday, or Saturday against Oklahoma State. Quick turnaround to Monday. And then it's Saturday and Monday again. And then they finish the season on a Saturday against Arizona. This is actually kind of a good test, I think, because what's the NCAA tournament going to be? It's going to be Thursday, Saturday, or Friday, Sunday, right? Like you're going to be playing 2 games within a relatively short time span. So this feels like it's maybe a good opportunity for KU to get that experience of playing those games consecutively to end the season, especially when we think about the Texas Tech to Houston turnaround. I mean, that's going to be a pivotal 72 hours there for Kansas, really. Let's quickly talk about Colorado here for a few minutes.
Yeah.
Kansas obviously beat them at Allen Fieldhouse in what I described as an uninspired or unimpressive game for KU, in which they just kind of put in the minimum effort required to beat Colorado, meaning they kept their arms length for a good chunk of the game, but Colorado wasn't shooting very well. They weren't really doing that much, and KU ends up winning kind of an unimpressive ho-hum game by 12 points in that one at Allen Fieldhouse. By the way, Colorado on Saturday, they picked up a huge win against Baylor. So they have some newfound confidence in themselves, I would think, heading into this game against Kansas after beating Baylor 76-74 in Boulder. Then now they get Kansas coming into Boulder as well. Ken Pond has this as a 7-point game in favor of KU. We just kind of spent quite a bit of time talking about it, about can Kansas build off of what they did here and go on the road and do it on the road. We'll see. I mean, my eyes immediately jumped to Zeke Mayo again. Talked about it over the course of the season. He's been lights out as a shooter at home, but you look at his, I mean, he is an over 10% worse 3-point shooter on the road this season versus at home, which is, it's almost unfathomable to think that you could have that drastic of splits between, I mean, you're doing the same thing. What's the difference? So he's the first guy that I kind of jumped to for this game. And then, with Colorado, the turnovers is something that they do a lot of. If you remember that first game, Kansas didn't turn them over. And I think Bill Self was probably not pleased with the defensive performance from KU, even though Colorado only scored 59 points in that first game. It wasn't because KU was really doing a lot defensively to pressure them, I don't think. It was really just they weren't able to hit some shots. So I don't know. This is still a scary game to me just because it's on the road. Kansas obviously should have some confidence, but what's your feelings heading into this one for KU as they do try to stack another solid game on top of what they did against Oklahoma State?
It's tough to win on the road in any conference that you're in. It's really tough to win on the road against a team that is starting to play with more confidence, which I think Colorado is right now. And I think you add in altitude to that, right? And that's another factor. Add in, too, that it's a really late game. For those of you who don't know, game's scheduled for 10 o'clock our time. So,
yeah.
10 p.m. Night our time. So, I think there are a lot of challenges there for Kansas. And so this is one of those that I think you almost look at like an NCAA tournament game, like you were talking about, the relatively quick turnaround, the 2 games in 3 days type of thing. I look at it as a survive and advance game, right? Like this is not one where I'm looking at any sort of point spread where I would be disappointed if KU won. If you win this thing 72-69, get out of there and celebrate your win with all the things that are going on there. Having said that, if you do have another really strong performance and to the point that you wind up with maybe a little bit more comfortable win, I think that's when you start to say, okay, like this may be a little bit different at this point. But I think to your point, and we talked about it on the show after the Colorado game, Colorado struggled on offense in that game in a way that was not really impacted by KU. And I think one of the things that we talked about was Colorado had some opportunities, particularly in that first half, where Kansas's rotations were not great, where Colorado had openings and they missed the passes and they didn't make the pass, or they missed a pass and that they didn't see the pass. And I think you can't count on that again. You need to be a lot more proactive in this thing. Obviously, Kansas was proactive in terms of generating turnovers in this one, and that was one of the reasons that Kansas was able to really roll out to that lead. Colorado turns the ball over on almost 22% of their possessions. And so if you're not turning Colorado over, that's a you thing. Like that's something that you need to do today. Colorado did a little bit better job of taking care of the ball, and by doing that, they still turned the ball over on, I think, 19% of their possessions against Baylor. So you should be able to turn Colorado over. Now, are they dead ball turnovers? Are they the types of turnovers that allow you to get out into transition and get some looks, which today that I think was a fairly big factor against Oklahoma State, where they were able to get some runouts and get some opportunities. I think that that's going to be the key to it. And we've said all along, Nick, when you look at this team, I think the shooting was always going to be a game-by-game thing, right? I think that there are some lineups where you could have a little bit more shooting out there, but generally speaking, the offense was going to be more come and go. I think the thing that this team has to make its calling card is that defense and playing with defensive energy. And I think that this is another chance where if Kansas can turn Colorado over and can play really well defensively, maybe you would start to feel pretty good about, okay, maybe they're figuring things out heading into that Texas Tech game.
Yeah, Colorado turned it over 8 times against Kansas in Allen Fieldhouse. That's one of the lowest numbers of the season for them.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, they are bottom 15 in the country in terms of turnover percentage. They're bottom 15 in the country in terms of steals given up, and they're bottom 15 in terms of just them turning it over. So, yeah, if you're not forcing turnovers, you're right. It's a you thing because they will turn it over, or they should turn it over. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. One other quick note from this Oklahoma State game, which, funny enough, on the turnovers, Kansas actually had more turnovers than Oklahoma State on Saturday. They had 8 down to Oklahoma State 17, but Kansas did a better job capitalizing off those turnovers. But one other quick thing I wanted to point out from this Oklahoma State game is, again, Kansas didn't really get to the free throw line that much, only 6 of 8 from the line. So I guess if you want to point to something as sort of nitpicky or like something they continue to struggle with a little bit, I guess you could point to that, because Kansas is now one of the lowest teams in the country in free throw rate, I think, for the season. They're in the bottom 5 actually in terms of free throws in the country. So that continues to be a concern, I guess, but it's been I think it's been overshadowed by obviously much larger concerns that have led to some of KU's struggles, but something to keep an eye on, I guess. Oklahoma State, by the way, only shot free throws 19 times in the game, which is, I think, below their average. So I guess, I don't know, that was kind of funny how that worked out too. All right, let's get into a game prediction here for the Colorado game. Do you think Kansas pulls it out, Kevin? Do you think they build off of what they did against Oklahoma State?
Yeah, they turned Oklahoma State over 11 times in the first half. And, in the second half, when the game was pretty much decided, KU got a little sloppy, gave the ball away, didn't turn Oklahoma State over quite as much. But all of that is to say that if Kansas plays with that intensity that they played with in that first half, in terms of scrambling, getting into passing lanes, making things difficult, then Kansas is going to have a chance to get some turnovers and some runouts in this game. And I do like Kansas to turn Colorado over more in the second go-around. I think Kansas wins this game. I do think it's going to be close, though, Nick. I know KenPom has it at 7. Again, that's over the course of the whole season, which I think favors KU a little bit, because KU's had some good parts earlier this season, hasn't necessarily been as good late, with the exception of that Oklahoma State game. It also hurts Colorado a little bit, because Colorado has been playing a lot better the last 4 or so games, and not so great in conference play up to that point. And so when you look at all of that, I expect this game to possibly be even closer, a 3 or 4 point game. But I do like Kansas to go ahead and pull this thing out. We usually pick a player to focus on. I'm going to go with DeJuan Harris in this one. And the reason why is 6 first half steals against Oklahoma State. I'm not saying he's going to get 6 first half steals or 6 steals at all against Colorado, but I do think that he's sort of the tip of the spear in terms of the pressure that Kansas wants to be able to apply defensively to try and turn people over. Also made a couple threes in this one, Nick, and if he's going to have opportunities to shoot the ball, which typically he is, because guys are going to go under screens on him when somebody else is driving, he's going to, and they try to kick it out to him, he's going to have some open looks like the one he made in the corner today. If he knocks down a couple 3-pointers, if he's being really active defensively, knocking balls around and helping, Kansas generate some turnovers against Colorado, that could be a really important thing as far as Kansas winding up with a win in that one.
Yeah, Colorado, after starting 0 of 13 in conference play, they've won 2 out of 3.
Yep.
They beat UCF, and then they just beat Baylor. So, yeah, they're playing maybe some of their best basketball of their conference schedule at this point with Kansas rolling into town. So, I think Kansas will find a way to get it done as well. Nick Palm favors KU also, so that's something important to note. I think Kansas will find a way to get it done. And I think, to your point, I'd like to see Kansas force some more turnovers. I think that would go a long ways. I kind of mentioned Zeke Nail already as a guy that I'm kind of watching just because of his 3-point shooting and some of the struggle he's had on the road versus at home. But why not Floyd Baduga, too? Another guy to keep an eye on with what he does off the bench. And Bill Self also reinserted Rylan Griffin into the starting lineup, and I think it paid off. Rylan Griffin looked pretty confident. He was 2 of 3 from beyond the arc, made some nice plays. Also had 6 assists in the game. Griffin actually led the team in assists with 6 of them. Had a really nice pass on a play where he recognized Oklahoma State tried to preemptively double team Hunter Dickinson in the post, and they just left KJ Adams alone underneath the basket. As Rylan Griffin found it, it was great. So that was really good to see. So he's back. If he's back in the starting lineup, I think that's a positive sign as well. And it feels like that works. It feels like what KU had today with the starting lineup, with Coit being sort of that scoring guard off the bench to help them out, and then Flory as well. That really seemed to just kind of work for KU. We'll see if it continues to work going forward, but that was overall really nice to see. So I do think Kansas will get it done on Monday nights. As you mentioned, yeah, it's a 10 p.m. Central tip between KU and Colorado. So I'll just say this. Pac-12 after dark is great when it's like Arizona State versus Washington and you're just up late one night and you just want to turn it on. It's terrible if one of your teams is in it now, like Kansas coming up against Colorado. So 10 p.m. is a bit ridiculous. Maybe we need to get Brett Yormark on the phone and tell him, no more of this. Brett Yormark knows me. He knows because I send him emails. I'll send him an email, be like, "This is stupid. You're whatever." So I'll get him on the phone. I'll tell him, never put KU at 10 p.m. ever again. Why are we doing this? It's incredibly dumb.
Excuse from Fat Joe.
Yes, that too. Yes. Also, I saw nobody bought those courtside seats at T-Mobile Center for the Big 12 tournament. Just let us go back down there, man. Don't ship us to Siberia up top. I mean, come on. What are we doing? Yeah. So I don't know. I'll leave that for a separate conversation. I try not to pile too much on Brett Yormark because I understand he's a busy guy. He's got a lot going on. He's trying to move the Big 12 tournament to New York, then Las Vegas, then whatever the hell else. So I never try to just put too much on him. I try to just give him one thing at a time because I think sometimes he may struggle if I try to tell him too much of what to do. So I let him do that. But
I'm already hitting BJ up for budget money for when he moves the Big 12 tournament to Rio de Janeiro for a year.
Yeah, that would be. Yeah. Don't give him any ideas. If Brett listens to the show, he may hear that and he may think, "Oh my God, that's genius! Why didn't I get that before?" Iowa State fans will travel great to Rio de Janeiro. Awesome.
Big 12 Brazil.
Yeah, don't give that man any ideas because he will do it. He will do it. Just like we will wrap up the show here today with KU beating Oklahoma State and with Colorado on the horizon. A couple of quick notes. Number one, the NFL Combine is going to be late next week, and you can expect some content from us relating to that, as KU has 4 football players at the Combine with Devin Neal, Logan Brown, Mello Dotson, and Kobe Bryant are the other two. I almost blanked on the other two. So they have four guys there, and you can expect some content on our YouTube channel, actually, at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN from those guys at the Combine late next week. And also KU football spring practice will kick off next Sunday on March 3rd. So you can look forward to tons of content coming your way about that. I think we're probably going to try to talk a little KU football, maybe sort of preview the spring practice season, spring football, maybe later on this week. So you'll want to be on the lookout for that as well as we continue to cover KU basketball and start to get into some KU spring stuff as well. I know both Kevin and I are very excited about getting to see KU football in action again this upcoming this spring coming up starting next week. So a couple quick notes there for you to chew on and keep an eye on out for over the course of the next coming week, and then with KU football over the next
remainder of the spring as well. So, Kevin, you got any final thoughts here before we wrap up the show?
No. Big game Monday night. Like it's, I think that it's one that if Kansas winds up having sort of a poor close to the end of the season, we may wind up looking at that Colorado game as sort of an indicator in that direction. And if Kansas finds a way to turn things around and head into the postseason a little bit hot, we may also look at that Colorado game and say, okay, that was when we sort of knew, because Oklahoma State, great one-off win, but you got to stack them. And I think that Colorado game, either way it goes, is going to be something that we're going to look back as sort of an inflection point on what happened.
That's it for this edition of the Pay Podcast. He's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. We've been brought to you by Emprise Bank. And Brett Yormark, don't get any ideas, by the way. Don't get any ideas, Brett. I've got your number on speed dial. Don't get any ideas. I'll be watching you. So
Big 12, but easy though.
You got to stop, Kevin. You're just getting them fired up.
I'm just listening places I want to visit. So.
Dude, you're giving them too many ideas. I mean, yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. So that's it. He's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See ya.